Hello, everybody. This is Henry Schneider with the Business Performance Podcast. And today it's my pleasure to talk with Hakan Kostepen of HK Ventures and Panasonic. Hakan has a long and interesting career that's very fascinating, and we'll explore that today. So welcome, Hakan.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Thank you, Henry.
So we've been chatting quite a bit, but nobody else has heard it. So if you could just please describe HK Ventures and what you're up to today, and who are your customers, and services are you providing?
Sure, happy to. Well, first of all, my background goes to working for big entities from U.S. Air Force, Electronic Data Systems, Ford Motor Company, and Panasonic. And I joined really when these companies, my work, I really enjoyed it. But now, of course, the times are a little different. Speed is everything. So in Silicon Valley, one of the things that I wanted to do is go faster. So in that H&K Ventures, it's Hakan and Kimberly. Kimberly is my wife.
Oh, okay.
And she's also a director at early childhood education. So she's looking at technology from the kids' point of view. And that's another conversation we can get into it too, how kids are looking into these new technologies, the indigo children. So in that this year, when Panasonic had some structural changes, I thought H&K Ventures would be a good entity. And of course, I still have, as of today, relationship with Panasonic. I'm advising them on certain things. And at the same time, in Silicon Valley, we have some game-changing technologies on a large spectrum of things that around mobility we call 4.0 that I'm actively consulting, advising, and really trying to connect the dots with the valuable people like you and try to spread the word that now is speed and really collaboration time.
Okay. Great. So one of the problems with maybe not the problem, one of the challenges you run into speed is bumping up against quality, because quality can suffer because you're moving so fast, mistakes happen. So how do you address that?
Right. I mean, lately, when you look at the software, electronics, agile, or waterfall versus circular development, and at the same time, one way to do this as you do your product planning and the development and the technology integration, looking into this all as a integral part of your activity. In other words, when you look at the companies we had, specifically my experience in Japan, we did everything. We need to do everything. But now part of it, as you want to go fast, is integrate as fast as you can with the proven elements of the partners. So that, I think, is very almost like a Lego approach. You take the certain bits and pieces, they're proven, so you minimize your risk, and then you blend in with the new technologies as much as you can in a controlled manner. And of course, it's all updated, changed as an agile development, because it used to be you did the product and it was gone. You never see the product, but now everything is connected, right? So as you play on this architecture, hardware versus software versus over-the-air updates, now things become much more connected. So part of it is the collaboration. Part of it is minimizing risk as integrated as much as possible. Part of it is the connected. I don't want to call it a product. I like more, platforms. You need to have a platform. Once you have the platform established, then you can have the different products also minimize the risk as you go fast.
Yeah. Now, the other thing is when you start plugging these building blocks together, like with even IoT, you've got all these interfaces. That's where the cyber security issues come up too. So how do you address that?
Right. Well, the cybersecurity now at the firmware level, it used to be cybersecurity meant internet connection. And as you have the IoT or IoE, Internet of Everything, the best part is also looking into the firmware level, but also what I call is federated security. In other words, one device is not enough to penetrate, or one device being vulnerable does not really impact your platform. You have to have the federated security, multiple devices, so that in a way it's a distributed architecture. This goes back to my Air Force days or US, I would say, DOD. You had a distributed defense, strategy. This is the same thing, right? You have your submarines and bombers and tactical stuff and so on and so forth. Same thing with the electronics. You have to distribute all your intelligence, and the federated security will be the future. And of course, it has dependencies, and it gives you much more stability and the credibility as far as being much more secure from the cyber side.
Okay, so what are one or two myths or misconceptions out there about integrating all these different parts together now?
Well, two things. One of them is each time we hear 3G, 4G, 5G, we feel like everything will be connected. 6G, 10G, 11G, 20G. It's just, that's the G buzz. But unfortunately, that hasn't been the case. So we have to look into new ways of connectivity of devices. And you can have the radio side as far as the spectrum as the Gs. And then you can go into wiring and harnessing and so on and so forth. But you got two problems. One of them is the sensor platform will be everywhere. So how do you power these? The second piece is how do you connect them as a mesh network so that these are independent yet stable networks? So that's why we're looking into these new technologies. One of the startups we're working here in Silicon Valley, surface plane magnetics, and they can send data and power for IoT devices. So that's how some of these things will be overcome so that you can drop these sensors or you can connect these devices using surface plane magnetics so that anything that is touching to one another could be communicating data. And you can have your gateway. The gateways can go up to satellites, or it can go up to your G, 5G, whatever G you have. And then, of course, it can get into micro-location. So the myth of being connected or problems being solved within the framework of today's technology, I think needs to be changed. We have to look into some new technologies, new paradigms, and some of them could be blend in with the existing technologies, but I think we have to be open-minded to look into these. And I think you're doing a great service connecting some of these technologies and dots.
Thank you. So, just talking about going from 3G to 4G was like a multiplier of 10, but going from 4 to 5 is a multiplier of 100. And we're going to get to the point where there's just so much information. How do you consume that so you can still function?
Right. Absolutely. And of course, now the information we have at the edge computing level, extracting information from the data, and the days of we stored everything. When we look back as far as the data availability, when you look at the trend, it's incredible. So you need to push the intelligence of gathering information from the data to the edge level, edge computing, because you also need to respond very, very, very fast.
Yeah.
At the same time, the data storage, I work with another company in Silicon Valley. That one I can give the name. The name of the company is called Corterex, and they have the world record on data archiving, read, write, search on hard drive, optical storage, flash, since 2013, 2014. And they have the data sizes, hexabytes, petabytes, incredible stuff. So when you look at the video alone, all the video monitoring we do, all this data being stored, whether it's the correctional facility or downtown or stadium, how do you manage this data? How do you reach? And then, of course, video analytics become much more important. So rather than storing everything, you have video analytics within the camera, edge computing, and then filter, add the metadata, so you can access this data very, very fast and quickly. So we look at this sensing, edge computing, AI at the edge device level, and then very quickly connecting these devices with the gateway, do another filtering, and then storing, archiving at the end so that you can go back and extract the information you need at the right time. We call it time, space, and place. At the right time, space, and place, the information needs to be actionable information. So we have the data. From the data, we go to information. But even information is not enough. It has to be actionable information. And the challenge now is it goes down to not heuristic information, but real-time now information. Sometimes forecasting what the actionable information will be. So that's the challenge we have. And that's my focus as what I call Mobility 4.0, looking into energy, information, IoT, IoE, and how do you pull it all together?
Yeah, and the other thing that's running underneath all this is how fast the hardware can respond. I mean, we're at the point where we're limited by the speed of light, and so now
Right,
we're looking at quantum, you know,
right.
computers. But even that, there is that upper limit that you can't go any faster.
Right, right. And of course, there's, quantum computing, there's a lot of activity. Also, terahertz level, there's a chip definition that is happening. I'm working with a company called Terra Group.
Hmm.
Brilliant people from Switzerland, Israel. They also have, now we have a Silicon Valley center we're establishing with them. The terahertz is also another, I would say, chapter looking into supercomputing, hypercomputing. So that's the challenge of we have now, looking into communications, the computing power, all those, as you said, we're at the limitations of the business and the technology. So we have to open up new paradigms and looking into new computing technologies and memory access. All of those, I think, in next 3 to 5 years, we'll see a huge shift. And when you look at what's happening in mobility the last 10 years, the shift is incredible. It's exponential. There's no question. So exciting times for people like you and I and the listeners.
Yes, wonderful. So let's see. So what are some of the obstacles that people perceive that prevent them from adopting this?
Well,
Moving
great
forward?
question. Great question. That always makes me smile, because one of the things that in my life, in the corporate world, that anytime we had a great idea, like, shifting, new paradigm, the first answer I got was, we've never done this before. And that was my point. This is what we've never done this before. So I think the risk management in the corporate world, and of course, including VCs and investors too, that unfortunately, we come to this time now, as I say, speed, results also tied to speed. So people want to see the results yesterday, which is not possible. So part of it is this institutions, I call it, that needs to jump in and establish these paths. And institutions doesn't have to be, universities or government. The way I look at this now, we need to treat some players in our economy and industry worldwide as institutions. I mean, IBM is an institution to me. Amazon is an institution to me. Qualcomm could be an institution. So some of these players need to look into and have some maybe open innovation path,
Right.
and also open up to collaboration between institutions. So those are the things that, as far as vision, we need to say set for all of us. And the interesting thing is, I mentioned earlier, my wife is a early childhood education in Palo Alto at a learning institute. The kids now that are coming, they have no hesitation on technologies, amazingly accepting these new technologies. Now, at the same time, they have a balance of social activities versus technology. And our generation, we're more into social side. Now we're basically bridging the technology. And our generation have seen some of us, mainframe, PC, and now. So I think the transition of the roadblocks will go away very quickly. And of course, another one is we need to share success stories. Many
Sure.
times, success stories are not shared, or even if you fail, you need to share that too. So at least we know where we are going to. So some of the things you do as far as podcast, I'm very happy because you're open to all subjects and ideas. So that's what needs to happen more, open communication, so we can overcome these hurdles of we've never done this before.
Right. And, the success, those are great, but you learn from your failures.
Right, right.
If you don't, I mean, a lot of times, when you have even a good customer experience, nobody says anything, but when it's bad, you hear everybody comes out of the woodwork. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think also in some cultures, failure is a little bit more hidden. You don't want to lose face.
right.
I will not mention which cultures, but that also need to overcome too. As a humanity, all of us, world is much smaller now. So some of these cultural barriers or cultural differences are okay and good. We can recognize, but when it's innovation, humanity, or impact on humanity, human life, I think we should have this universal idea of sharing, failing, and being successful, startup, and then scale up together are all good.
Yeah, yeah, and especially, even when you're talking about the big companies, we really need to. I mean, I've got my first podcast episode is with Softtech in Mexico, and they're a big software provider, but they've got an innovative department that is actually looking at what can we do with RPAs to improve how we develop software. And
Right.
if you take that mindset and you do experiments and you fail fast and you learn and you keep going, and you'll eventually get something that's great. And that's otherwise, IBM, has been the leader for so long. If they don't perform, they're going to start losing.
Absolutely.
Amazon
I
too.
agree with you more.
So let's talk about your life here. So you start out with the Air Force, and what defining moment over your career led you to be such an advocate here for moving fast and technology, etc.?
Well, when you look at my life, our lives, each of us have these turning points. And I think those turning points are very valuable. And sometimes we overlook them. For me, of course, being in the Air Force as a process, structured entity, sometimes as one entity, was very powerful. And then my life with EDS, Ross Perot, that was a great transition from Air Force into the technology world with somebody like Ross. And then, of course, working on simulation systems and hardware in the loop, transputers at the time was incredibly new. And of course, neural nets, speech recognition. Then, of course, moving into Ford Motor Company, Henry Ford, I was fascinated, him being his idea and concept, living in the company as an institution, as Ford Motor Company. And then Ford went into Ford 2000, and that was all about systems engineering. And we had this big, growth, acquiring Jaguar, Volvo, and Aston Martin. At the time, it was really sandbox, and we were just getting into the connectivity into the vehicle as well. So going to England to Jaguar and launching the speech recognition system is one of the turning points in my life, because the idea was for me to get international service. And then we had at Ford research on speech recognition system. We spent millions of dollars. And when the Jaguar came up and I was going there, I did propose that we take this speech recognition system into S-Type. So I was so excited. I went to Jaguar. A true story. The chief engineer, I won't give his name at the time, but he was at Jaguar very unhappy. He said, "What is speech recognition? This is all about engine. The Jaguar is driving." And it's another podcast, but long story short, the same person, when we were launching vehicle, gave a speech how proud he was that bringing technology into Jaguar as a command and control system. This is the time in-car phones, 1998 was happening. And he was saying that here we are, you can drive, enjoy the Jaguar engine, the purring of the engine as a cat, and then have your communications as a business person. So to me, that was awakening in a way that somebody was so against new technology as a Jaguar chief engineer, later coming around and celebrating and in fact advocating technology was a good path to say that if you execute well, things come around. And of course, then I joined Panasonic as a Japanese company, 1 year in Japan. That was an incredible experience living in Japan that made me feel like mobility is more than physical mobility. Sometimes in that cell of people moving, the best thing is being connected virtually at some place. Telepresence, telemedicine, and of course Panasonic being the consumer electronics company. So those are the two that was very life-shifting for me. And then of course, coming back from Japan, establishing the entity here in Silicon Valley with Panasonic was incredibly powerful, because first time in my life in Silicon Valley, I've seen people that with the attitude, confidence, and competence that we can change the world. That is so powerful. So when you bring all these things, I advise every listener to pay attention in their lives, these turning points, and share them.
So, could you just tell us about, maybe a life experience you had growing up to where you are today that still influences how you approach business today?
Ah, well, I was born and raised in Istanbul, Turkey. My father was a football player, soccer player,
Ah,
and famous. He was in the national team and all that. So I was a little bit under pressure when I was growing up. Our last name is not common, so everybody would say, "Oh, Hakan, uh, are you so and so's son?" And I would say yes. And of course, the next question would be, "Of course, you're going to be soccer player, right?" And I would be like, "Right." But I was 14 years old, 13 and a half, 14. My father pulled me aside, and I get emotional each time I talk about this. He said, "Do you want to be a good, best soccer player, or do you want to be a best engineer, businessman?" I said, "Both. I want to be both." He said, "Well, you can't. You could be average player." So I didn't talk to him for 2 months.
Mhm.
I was so upset with him. "What do you mean I can't be the best soccer player?" But it was interesting because years later I found out that he was talking about anything we do physical, as time goes, it has a negative impact. So he was famous, of course, and then his performance was way up there. As you get older, some of these things become a challenge. So
Right.
he was trying to tell me that pick a profession that as you live longer, you get wiser, not only at a physical level, but also a mental, spiritual level. So it took me years to understand that. But of course, at the time, I wanted to be all and everything. Now, that experience gave me a lot of insight for kids and in mentors
Mhm.
around me that people want to be everything and everywhere. So in some cases, we have to pick and choose. And also some cases, we have to look at the life as a whole, not just next 5 years, 2 years, or 3 years. Life is a long journey. And as we share our experiences, it becomes much more exciting. So I would say definitely the lesson from my dad looking into life as a whole, and not only my life, but your life, listeners' life. If we bring it all, together, all these lives, then journey becomes much more easier and invention, ideas, innovation happen much faster.
Sure. Wonderful. That's a very inspiring story. Um, Now let's talk about some successes that you've had or where you've helped people to succeed. Can you share some experiences?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I would start from the Air Force. Air Force is a place you have lots of people, entities coming from different places, but they blend in that environment. So the culture of the Air Force as a structured environment was, when I was there, was very valuable. So I was able to touch many lives, and many of them come to Air Force and military as far as thinking high tech. So that was powerful. And then of course, Rossborough EDS in itself, it had a culture of service, systems engineering and service. So that was very powerful. We built great teams. At EDS, you can have 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people. It really didn't matter. Just like the Air Force, you had the same service and dedication and technology level. They had a training 3 years. And that to me was so powerful that I was able to share my experiences with the homogeneous team, but very innovative. Then, of course, Ford Motor Company was more international and global. And globalization, of course, with the Jaguar, Volvo, that was powerful. I spent some time in Europe, as I said earlier, and that gave me a window to the world that you can impact anybody's life. It doesn't matter where they're from, their background. So in that sense, the being example, just being example rather than advising, was wonderful. That I noticed sometimes I can influence people without even talking to them, just being an example out there doing something. Then of course Panasonic is very, very service oriented. I would say total collaboration, virtual teams, and the Asian, the Japanese story is also leading behind. So
Mhm.
how do you lead behind? As I was learning how to lead behind, coming from Air Force and EDS and Ford Motor Company, being much more leading up front, that was so eye-opening that I would see years later I had impact on somebody's life at Panasonic that I didn't even know at the time. So then now at this age and time, I'm looking into this podcast, your activity, what you do has impact on many things. So it used to be for me, rather than waiting on the impact and seeing, now it's almost like this flower you leave at the water or message in a bottle, then somebody reads it, and then the rest is you hear back many, many years later that it's the joy. So go beyond time, space, and place and be an example. That's what I say.
Okay, so that's a wonderful story. So if you distilled it all the way down, would that be the moral of the story? Or is there something else that's underlying that ties it all together?
I would say the last thing that ties it all together, definitely, sometimes rewards. We want rewards to be there yesterday, which is our culture. I mean, we were educated that way. But if you let it go, share ideas, and give to society and people, the rewards will come back. And the most pleasant rewards for me is almost like a seed you put down some time ago. At the right time, it comes back to you in such a surprise. So that's what I think is so important, that rewards can come later, and there's a time for it, the right time for it too. So being patient as far as innovation, ideas, and giving is also essence of, I would say, success is a maybe tying all together.
Okay, so what does success look like for Hakan?
Success for me, great question. Success for me is success of the team, people that I touch, their lives. And that is very, very, in a way, sensitive conversation. That could be another podcast too. But in reality, our lives touch many people's lives. Even as you drive the vehicle on here, Silicon Valley, Highway 101, you touch people, what you do. So in small things on internet, little comments you put. So we don't have the power of ourselves as member influencing success of ours and others. For me, the most gratifying thing is when I see others' success that ties into my touch points. I love that. As I said, we have some technologies companies now, surface plane magnetics, biotronics as a biomimicry, bring in cells into electronics, another startup company here. We have some activity on the terahertz. All these things are such an interesting game-changing technologies. It could be as sophisticated as those, or it could be as simple as taking something that is here as a mobile power generation and taking this into Africa and changing the world for those people. I mean, we have now a technology in Silicon Valley, 125 kilovolt ampere, 200. These trucks, mobile power generators, they are very small, compact technologies as far as the generator technology. So at the back of the truck, you don't even see the generator. It used to be that you will pull these big generators. Now it's compact, very tiny. So these trucks will power places like Africa when they don't have a power. So at the back of the truck, we can also put water desalination. The name of the company is Cooltech, incredibly powerful people. So the technology could shift lives, and that's the success really for me.
Okay, wonderful. I just enjoy your passion too for all of this. This is very great. So just thinking now about your experience and when you started HK Ventures, you haven't been going that long, just 7 months basically, but what have you learned over time that works and what doesn't work?
Well, one thing that I've learned, HNK Ventures is Hakan and Kimberly. So I learned to work with my wife much closer, which is, we've been married for many years, but having a business partner is a different chapter. So I would recommend in the families, and we used to have these family businesses.
Yes.
All these years, I had my own path. My wife, Kimberly, had her own path. She is an educator. But technology and education also come together, right? So the biggest learning to me was technology has no boundaries. Kids have so many innovation ideas. I mean, the funny thing is, there's a story that Kim told me. One of the students comes to her, and 5-year-old idea is, why do we have these mobile phones everybody's holding? Why don't we have phone stations? People can use the phones when they want to. So this little wonderful genius was suggesting that because maybe he doesn't get the attention from the parents, whatever that reason is, thinking that phone booth is a good idea, which that's what we used to have, right? Phone
That's
booth.
right.
So his idea, his
Old
innovation
school.
is, right, you don't need everybody phone. You can have a place and he draws a picture and so on and so forth. So to me, that's also the question of learning of technology, social paradigms, and how kids look at it. It's very complicated. So I think that's what we need to do as far as, for me, learning every day when you have your own as H&K Ventures. First of all, you make a lot of decisions your own, which is wonderful. Much faster speed. That's essence of life now. We're all around this speed. And at the same time, collaborations and partnerships. Sometimes big corporations are limiting us to be connected. They have an NDA, IP, and so on and so forth. For me, the technology, different dimensions, looking into platform rather than the product, sharing information at all levels, and connecting people like you, Henry, doing a podcast, which no boundaries. That's a few of the things that I've learned. And I hope we can do many more to share more.
Sure. So again, along with your view of the world and your passion, what is the most important advice that you give to people when they come to talk to you?
Well, the thing that I say is tell me, share with me, not just today, but tell me more about your experiences, where you want to go, your vision, your mission in life. Each of us, even though we know or we don't know, we're aware or we're not aware, we have a mission, we have a vision in life. Sometimes, unfortunately, in these communications, when somebody comes to me, I would hear technology piece, but that's not enough. I want to know where this person is coming from. Some of your questions, we also ask them on the technology side, lessons learned. Where did you come from? Where do you want to go? So I think us knowing each other, or somebody coming to me and talking to me or sharing more with the people around you is the biggest advice that I give to people. Because as you share more about you and personal things, you learn a lot and the bridges are built. And this is not just the technology level, but also at the human level too. And that's one thing we're missing more. Rather than connecting on the internet, we need to be connecting at the human level as well. Right. So that's my advice, biggest advice.
Yes, yeah, and I completely agree with you. We have to go back to that. It's gotten so impersonal and passive, and people just say stuff, and you get your feelings get hurt, but they don't know that. It's
right.
like, yeah. So
absolutely. Absolutely.
So we could just go on and on and on. This is fascinating today. I am just really enjoying talking with you, but running out of time. So to kind of wrap things up, would you please let people know how they can get in touch with you?
Sure. Well, H&K Ventures are based in Silicon Valley, and email is fine. We have a webpage, hnkventures.org, as ORG, and my email is Kostepen H, my last name H, at hkventures.org. And of course, they can contact me, if it's okay with you, Harry, through you too, because I would like us to be, building the triangle, because people contact me the way I see through the podcast also has a connection to you. Mm-hmm. So I would like to build on those connections. So either you come to me through Henry, which I'll be very happy, or directly, which I'll connect you with Henry as well. Welcome.
Thank you. So once again, you're a fantastic storyteller. It's just fascinating listening to you. And I really enjoyed your advice about going fast and being transparent, and just the passion you have for what you're working with. So, Hakan, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Henry. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.